Looking for a guaranteed way to create content that resonates with your audience? Start a podcast. Interview your ideal clients and let them choose the topic of the interview. Because if your ideal clients care about the topic, there's a good chance the rest of your audience will care about it too. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by my friend Brian Sowards. He is the enterprise go-to-market strategist at the Muse. Brian, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm having a ball today because the photo of the black hole just came out and I'm geeking out about it.
Wasn't even on my radar, so to speak. And now I've got something to talk with the kids about because my oldest definitely loves all things science. So it's going to be a good conversation. So great to hear, man. I'm doing well, except for dealing with some snow out here in Colorado. Yes, snow in April at the time we're recording here. Brian, we're going to be talking about not necessarily black holes, but an interesting phenomenon when it comes to prospecting in sales, which, you know, maybe there's some similarities to black holes there. I don't know. But 4 specific ways that you have found work really well with organizations of all sizes. Before we get into those things that you're going to be sharing today, I would love for you to introduce yourself to listeners and share a little bit about your background for folks that don't know you as well as I do, and what you and the team at the Muse are up to these days.
Yeah, happy to. I began my career at a pretty young age. I launched my first startup when I was 16. It was a software company around educational content, and made many attempts from there to build a startup. I was born and raised in Delaware, and despite the fact that almost every startup is incorporated there wasn't actually much of a tech scene. And so I had to learn everything sort of on my own. And, I think it gave me some really great skills, which are, being able to just dive into an area I haven't learned before, research it relentlessly, and most importantly, be okay with the fact that I'm going to come up with some ideas and I can feel it at some point, that moment when I've got to try it if I'm actually going to learn anything more. And so, I think the exciting thing about the B2B world that we're in now, especially for companies that are, selling SaaS products or working in the cloud, or part of the digital transformation we're seeing happening really to companies at all levels, is that it's a rapid time of experimentation. And the Muse is an incredible company that really performs, I think, a vital service to the world in providing genuine career advice, the same kind of career advice you might get if you graduated from, a top 100 school or working in one of the big 4 consulting firms, or just happen to have family who really understood how to build a successful career in a knowledge economy and beyond, and taking that advice and making it available to everyone. It's advice that I've used in my own career. It's advice that I've given out to friends, and it was really a solution that I was able to use in my last startup, where we created a new category. We actually created a new way of bringing crowdfunding to universities as a tool that their students could use to raise money for amazing learning projects, including launching experiments into space, as well as many other cool things like documentaries and competing at athletic events and social causes that students were passionate about. And the really interesting thing was we had to hire people for a job that didn't exist. We had literally created it. A crowdfunding educator, someone who was going to teach people how to bring their communities together and raise money. And it was a really interesting combination of a lot of different skill sets, but there wasn't one readily sort of applicant pool of candidates that we could go to for that. And the Muse was our partner in telling our story and really recruiting amazing people based on who they were and what their aspirations were and their affinity for our purpose and our mission as a company. Of course, the thing that we're seeing now is every company in the world is beginning to realize that they have to compete on culture. And the things that really motivate the most exceptional employees are things like purpose, are things like being able to learn and adapt and build new skills. And most companies are finding that their future is more about roles maybe they haven't a lot of experience in hiring for versus ones that they do. And that's what drew me to the Muse today as an enterprise go-to-market strategist, where my role is to help the Muse take everything that we've accomplished for some of the fastest growing companies in the world and help really large employers and the global 2000 take our knowledge, take our insight, take our tools, and apply it to their own hiring needs.
I love it, man. There's so many things you touched on there that I completely agree with. There's one in what you guys are up to at the Muse in helping people manage career paths with the new world of work. There's so much complexity there, and there's so much advice needed. And so I love that side of things. And then, to the other side, in the way that you guys are working with companies that you experienced in your startup, I've heard other folks that talk about category creation, like Anthony Kenneda at Gainsight that we've had on the show here before multiple times and in our category creation series. And he's talked about, if you're creating a category, then you have to create the job description for the people that fill that category. And so it sounds like, you went through that in your startup as well. And very interesting story in how the journey that you went through brought you to what you're doing at the Muse today. So you're engaging with some large enterprises, but as we've mentioned, you've had varied experiences in your career as it relates to sales and business development. And so there are some specific strategies that I know you wanted to share with listeners today. And there are 4 of them specifically. To put a little context to it, as you and I were chatting offline recently, you mentioned that you see sales as moving from an extroverts game to an introverts game. Tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll speak to, within that context, why are these specific tactics important? But I think laying the groundwork there could be helpful for folks.
Yeah, I think, if you define sort of introvert and extroverts based on sort of where you get your energy from. So, extroverts are really energized by hanging out with large groups of people, and introverts maybe get more energy from that intimate one-on-one connection. I think if you look at B2B sales today, it's a lot more of those intimate one-on-one connections. We all know how much we rely often on internal champions to build the case, how much of what we do is really about building their competence and confidence in talking about topics or making business cases for things that they believe or that they know, but they haven't necessarily been through the journey of convincing others to make an investment in before. And in my case, I'm talking with remarkably smart people who are in some of the world's most impactful companies, and they still have those challenges. Mm-hmm. And so as an ambivert myself, I have fun on both sides of that equation. But what I've really noticed is tuning into more of that introverted style has given me a tremendous amount of success. And it's led me to, as we're going to talk about in a moment with the tactics, it's led me to really rebuild the actual operations, the foundational practice, the workflow that's underneath everything that I do. I think that you can create a contrast here pretty easily. If you think of business to business sales in the way that, I think sometimes people still imagine it is if they haven't been inside of it themselves. You think of going to conferences and, dialing a lot of phone numbers and making a lot of phone calls and sort of this gregarious, effusive, sell kind of approach. And HubSpot has done a wonderful job in just showing the world how much of the buying decision is accomplished before someone even calls. And, there's always the debate about what sales styles are the most effective. I think Chorus has done a great job in showing what consultative selling looks like today, just how it's not always about, in fact, it's often not about asking open-ended questions. It's more about as we saw in The Challenger Seller, a phenomenal book. It's more about provoking a thought process and then being available and open in terms of the responses you get to create that genuine connection. I'd say if there's one superpower that I'm bringing to the table in a sale consistently, it's helping people articulate what they're trying to say. So often we forget that in the world that we're in, if you have product market fit, or even if you are working on product market fit, but on an area that's really important or intensely painful for a customer, you don't have to convince them to buy. You have to connect with what they're experiencing and what they're feeling and what they're thinking. And most importantly, they need to feel comfortable that you're not going to be pressuring them or sort of putting your own agenda ahead of the needs that they're trying to meet in their group. It's not really you versus them. It's them trying to create success for the group that they're in and you being a part of that. In most cases, it's almost never are we selling a tool specifically that one person is going to use and just them, right? In a B2B environment, you're almost always having a collaborative number of stakeholders, even if at the end of the day, you're really solving one person's problem. There's often many people involved in whether or not they get to make that decision. And so like you might, if you think about the introverts of your life, you might notice that they tend to start by listening. They tend to be deferential. They tend to be very attuned to whether someone's feeling comfortable and is ready to have the next conversation. And I think it's wonderful to, sort of lean in. I will deliberately sometimes bring things up that might be a little forward. But if I do, I always then follow it up immediately with, is that comfortable? Does that resonate with you? Is there another direction you might want to take things in? So I know that's more just a style point, but when we look at how rev ops or sales ops, sales enablement connects to the buyer's journey, that we're really taking people along and thinking about how can we win bigger deals faster that are then going to lead to internally referred business as well as externally referred business. Everything that I'm going to be sharing with you, I've done in a measurable environment and seen that not only is it more impactful, it's categorically more impactful. It's so much more effective from a conversion perspective that it's really another class of engagement. And it's not so much about which one is better. This is an approach that people are resonating with versus an approach that's essentially a hunt and peck and hoping to get lucky.
All right, guys, as you probably noticed, we only covered 2 of the 4 specific prospecting and deal management strategies that Brian and I alluded to at the top of this episode. This conversation with Brian was so good and packed full of value that we've actually broken it up into 2 parts. So check back tomorrow for the rest of my conversation with Brian, where he shares 2 more strategies that have generated amazing results for him. Tomorrow, you'll hear Brian share a very tactical way he empowered buyers to move the process along internally, reducing sales cycle lengths by over 90%. He also shares specific ways he's used one of our favorite strategies here at Sweetfish, content-based networking. As always, thank you so much for listening, and we really hope you enjoyed today's episode. We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big 3, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.